The California sun was doing its best to turn the entire city of Beverly Hills into a sparkling photograph. It was one of those perfect afternoons where the light seemed to have a special quality, making the palm trees look greener and the windows of the expensive cars gleam with a blinding intensity. On a street like this, where every storefront screamed luxury, it was easy to feel like you were on a movie set. And for one particular woman walking down the sidewalk, that feeling was something she spent most of her life trying to escape. She was dressed for invisibility, not for the red carpet. A simple, comfortable t-shirt, a pair of well-worn jeans, and a baseball cap pulled down low over her face. Her goal was simple: to blend in, to become just another person enjoying the beautiful day, to experience the world without the weight of a famous name hanging over her head. She pushed open a heavy glass door, a small bell chiming softly above her, and stepped into a different world. The noise of the street instantly vanished, replaced by a profound, almost reverent quiet. The air inside was cool and carried a subtle, expensive scent, a mix of leather, polished wood, and a faint floral perfume that you could never buy in a regular store. The light was softer here, filtered through sheer curtains that made the whole space feel like a dream. This was a high-end boutique, the kind of place where things were not just sold but curated. The floors were a glossy, pale marble that reflected the light from elegant crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Everything was designed to make you feel like you had stepped into a place of pure, unattainable beauty. For the woman in the baseball cap, this was the perfect escape. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here on a mission, a very personal one. It was her best friend's birthday a week ago, and she had been so busy with work that she had completely missed it. She felt terrible about it. This wasn't just any friend. This was the person who had known her before all the noise, before the cameras and the magazine covers. This was the friend who still remembered her as the awkward girl with big dreams, the one who would bring her a cheap cup of coffee and listen to her complain for hours. A simple, late birthday gift was the least she could do to make up for it. But it had to be the right gift. Something that said, "I see you. I remember you. I cherish you." She moved slowly through the store, her hands tucked into her pockets, her eyes scanning the displays without really looking at anything in particular yet. She was soaking in the feeling of anonymity. No one was staring. No one was asking for a selfie. The staff, dressed in sharp, black uniforms, gave her polite, professional nods but didn't crowd her. They were trained to recognize potential customers, and her simple attire probably made her look like a browser or someone just passing through. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Sometimes the simple act of browsing, of just looking at things with no pressure to buy, was the greatest luxury in the world. It was a freedom she had lost long ago. Her thoughts drifted back to her friend. She remembered a lazy afternoon years ago, sitting on a worn-out sofa, laughing so hard at a silly television show that their sides hurt. Her friend had a unique way of finding joy in the smallest things, a light that never seemed to dim, no matter what life threw at her. The gift needed to reflect that light. It couldn't be something flashy or ostentatious. It had to be elegant, but with a touch of warmth, a bit of personality. She walked past racks of designer clothes that probably cost more than a car, her fingers lightly brushing against the soft fabrics. They were beautiful, but they weren't right. They felt too cold, too impersonal. She found herself drawn towards the back of the store, where the lighting was even softer. Here, in glass cases lined with dark velvet, was the jewelry. This felt more promising. Jewelry, when done right, could be so personal. It could tell a story. She leaned over a counter, her eyes tracing the delicate forms of silver necklaces and the shimmering facets of earrings. A sales associate approached with a quiet smile. "Let me know if you'd like to see anything," she said, her voice gentle. The woman in the cap returned the smile. "Thank you, I'm just looking for now." The associate nodded and retreated, giving her space. It was a small interaction, but it felt like a victory. She was being treated like a normal customer. Her gaze settled on a small collection of bracelets. One in particular caught her eye. It was made of interlocking silver circles, each one slightly imperfect, not a perfect, machine-made roundness, but more organic, like ripples on water. Tucked between the silver circles were tiny, polished stones in a deep, warm blue like a twilight sky. It wasn't dripping with diamonds. It wasn't shouting for attention. It was quiet and beautiful, and it felt exactly like her friend. There was a story in its design, a sense of connection and imperfect harmony. She knew, with a certainty that warmed her from the inside, that this was the one. This was the gift that would say everything she wanted to say. She pointed to the bracelet, catching the eye of the sales associate. "Could I please see that one?" she asked, her voice soft. The associate, whose name tag read Clara, unlocked the case with a small silver key and carefully lifted the bracelet out, placing it on a black velvet cloth on top of the counter. "It's a lovely piece," Clara said. "The designer calls it Circle of Friends." The woman smiled. The name was perfect. She reached out and gently picked up the bracelet. It was cool and heavy in her hand, the silver smooth against her skin. The little blue stone seemed to hold the light. She imagined it on her friend's wrist, a small, sparkling reminder of their bond. For a moment she was completely lost in the thought, a feeling of pure, simple happiness washing over her. The noisy world outside, the demands of her job, the constant pressure of being a public figure, all of it faded away. In this quiet corner of a luxurious shop, holding a small silver bracelet, she was just a person thinking about someone she loved. And for a few precious minutes, that was more than enough. The peaceful bubble that had wrapped around the woman in the baseball cap was about to be popped, and not gently. The soft chime of the boutique's door announced a new arrival, but this sound was immediately followed by a sharp, disruptive energy that swept through the store like a sudden gust of cold wind. The quiet, respectful atmosphere was instantly charged with tension. All eyes, including those of the sales associates, turned towards the entrance. Standing there, as if she owned not just the store but the very air everyone was breathing, was a woman who seemed to radiate importance. She was dressed in a way that was less about style and more about a clear, broadcasted message of wealth. A stark white designer coat, probably costing more than most people's monthly rent, was draped over her shoulders. Her handbag was a work of art, all clean lines and a logo so famous it needed no introduction. Her sunglasses, despite being indoors, were perched on her perfectly styled hair like a crown. She carried herself with an air of absolute impatience. As if the world was running late and it was personally offending her, she didn't browse. She didn't look around. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning, searching for a target. She spotted a sales associate who was patiently helping another customer and let out an audible, exasperated sigh. "Excuse me?" she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. "I need some assistance over here." The associate gave her a polite, apologetic smile and a small gesture that said, "I'll be with you in a moment." This was not the answer the woman wanted. Her lips tightened into a thin, angry line. She began to pace a little near the entrance, the sharp click-clack of her expensive heels on the marble floor marking her growing irritation. She pulled out her phone, tapping at the screen aggressively, then looked up again, her gaze sweeping the room once more. This time, her eyes landed on the woman in the baseball cap, who was still standing by the jewelry counter, the delicate silver bracelet resting on the black velvet cloth in front of her. From the woman's perspective, Sandra was just a figure in a simple t-shirt, looking intently at the merchandise. She wasn't dressed like a shopper. In her world, people who looked like that were the people who worked there. Her mind made up. She strode across the store, her movements sharp and purposeful. She walked right up to the counter, ignoring the fact that the woman was clearly a customer engaged with a product. She didn't see a person, she saw a solution to her problem. Without a word of preamble, she raised her hand and snapped her fingers. The sound was small, but in the hushed boutique it was as loud as a gunshot. It was a gesture filled with disrespect. A command you might give to a dog, not a human being. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You," she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the woman in the cap. "I need to see that necklace in the window." "The one with the canary diamond? Now I'm in a hurry." The woman in the baseball cap flinched, not from the sound, but from the sheer audacity of it. She slowly lifted her head, her eyes widening slightly behind the brim of her cap. For a second, she was confused. Was this woman talking to her? She glanced around, but there was no one else nearby. The realization dawned on her slowly, then all at once. This woman, this stranger, thought she worked here. A small, almost weary smile touched her lips. She had dealt with awkward situations before, but this was a new one. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said gently, her voice calm and polite. She made a small gesture with her hand, a universal sign of peace. "I don't actually work here." She expected the woman to maybe look embarrassed, to apologize for the mistake and then move on. It would be an awkward moment, but it would pass. But the woman in the designer coat was not capable of admitting a mistake. Her ego was too big, her sense of entitlement too deeply ingrained. Instead of backing down, she leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing as they scanned the woman in the cap from head to toe. The look was one of pure, unadulterated disdain. She took in the simple t-shirt, the worn jeans, the casual baseball cap. To her, these weren't the clothes of a person seeking anonymity. They were the uniform of the help. She let out a short, ugly laugh. "Don't work here," she repeated, her voice now loud enough for the other shoppers to hear clearly. "With what you're wearing, I'd say you should be grateful for the assumption." The words were like little darts aimed to hurt and humiliate. They hung in the air, sharp and cruel. A few other customers who had been browsing nearby stopped what they were doing and turned to stare. The quiet, elegant atmosphere of the boutique was now completely shattered, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable tension. The woman in the baseball cap felt a hot rush of embarrassment creep up her neck. The warm, happy feeling she had just moments ago, while thinking about her friend and holding the perfect bracelet, vanished completely. It was replaced by a cold, hollow feeling in the pit of her stomach. She had been in the public eye for a long time, and she had developed a thick skin, but this was different. This wasn't a critic reviewing a movie or a tabloid printing a bad picture. This was a personal, face-to-face attack, a public shaming based purely on her appearance. It was designed to make her feel small, and for a moment it worked. Her friendly expression faded, her face becoming a mask of quiet dignity. She knew that arguing would be pointless. It would only escalate the situation and create a scene, which was the last thing she wanted. So she did the only thing she could do. She simply turned away, turning her back to the rude woman and focusing her attention back on the bracelet in the display case. It was a silent refusal to engage, a statement that said, "You do not exist to me." The woman in the designer coat, seeing this, felt a surge of victory. She had put the help in her place. She straightened her coat, a smug look of satisfaction on her face, and muttered just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Honestly, the help these days. No respect." She then clicked her heels and marched towards another counter, determined to find someone who would serve her properly, but the damage was done. The beautiful, peaceful afternoon had been tainted, and the woman in the baseball cap was left standing there, the sparkle of the little blue stones in the bracelet now looking a little dimmer. The silence that followed the woman's cruel words was heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a peaceful silence, but a tense, awkward one, filled with the unspoken thoughts of everyone who had witnessed the exchange. The woman in the baseball cap stood frozen, her back still turned to the source of the humiliation. She could feel the eyes of the other customers on her, a mixture of pity and curiosity. It was a familiar yet always unwelcome sensation to be the center of attention without ever having asked for it. She focused on her breathing, a slow, deliberate in and out, trying to push down the hot flush of embarrassment that was threatening to consume her. The beautiful silver bracelet, the symbol of her friendship, and the reason for this entire trip, now felt cold and heavy in her memory. From across the counter, the sales associate Clara watched with a pained expression. She had seen difficult customers before. It was part of the job in a place like this, but this was different. This was a deliberate, public attack on someone who had done nothing to deserve it. She saw the slight tremor in the woman's shoulders, the rigid way she held herself. It was the posture of someone trying desperately to hold themselves together. Clara wanted to say something, to offer some comfort, but she was a professional. Her role was to de-escalate, to be a calming presence. She took a quiet step closer to the woman in the cap, her voice a low, gentle whisper. "I am so sorry about that," she said, the words filled with genuine sympathy. "Please don't let her ruin your afternoon." The woman in the cap gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She couldn't bring herself to speak. If she opened her mouth, she wasn't sure what would come out. Anger? Tears? She just wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. The simple, happy mission she had been on now felt tainted, spoiled. The joy she had felt just moments ago, the warmth of thinking about her friend, had been replaced by a cold, hollow ache. All she wanted to do was pay for the bracelet and get out of this suffocating store, to escape back into the anonymity of the busy street, but the drama was not over. The rude woman, having successfully asserted her dominance, had now moved on to another sales associate near the front of the store. Her voice, though not directed at her anymore, still cut through the air like shards of glass. "Finally," she was saying, her tone dripping with impatience. "I need to see the new collection of watches. The ones that were featured in last month's magazine. And I expect to be given your full attention. Is that clear?" Her voice was a constant, irritating hum in the background, a reminder of the ugliness that had just occurred. It made it impossible for the woman in the cap to find the peace she so desperately needed. She could hear the other associate responding with practiced politeness, but the rude woman was not satisfied. "No, not that one." "The other one? Are you even listening? This is ridiculous. I'm a very important client. I could shop anywhere, you know." Each word was another little stab, another reminder of the toxic energy that now polluted the once serene boutique. The woman in the cap closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block it out. She thought about her friend again. She thought about her friend's laugh, her kindness, the way she could always find the good in people. She wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want her to be driven away by someone so full of bitterness. Buying this bracelet wasn't just about making up for a missed birthday anymore. It was an act of defiance. It was about choosing kindness over cruelty, about holding on to the good in the face of the bad. With a quiet resolve, she turned back to the counter. The warm, gentle smile she had offered Clara earlier was gone, but it was replaced by something stronger, a look of calm determination. She met Clara's eyes. "I'd like to buy the bracelet," she said, her voice steady and clear. It was a small statement, but it felt like a huge victory. Clara's face broke into a relieved and grateful smile. "Of course," she said, her voice warm. "An excellent choice. It really is a special piece." As Clara carefully began to process the transaction, wrapping the bracelet in soft tissue paper and placing it in an elegant gift box, the woman in the cap found herself able to breathe again. The focus was back on the gift, back on the positive reason she was here. The rude woman's continued tirade in the background faded into a dull, meaningless noise. It was like a storm passing far away while she stood in a small, protected circle of calm. She watched Clara's hands as they worked, the movements precise and full of care. It was a comforting, normal human interaction. It was a reminder that for every one person like the rude customer, there were people like Clara who carried themselves with grace and kindness. She thought about how easily the woman in the designer coat had judged her, based on a simple t-shirt and a pair of jeans. She had seen a nobody, someone she could disrespect without consequence. The irony was, of course, staggering. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Her worth wasn't determined by a stranger's opinion or by the price tags on her clothes. Clara finished packing the gift box and tied it with a simple, elegant ribbon. She slid it into a sleek carrier bag and handed it to the woman in the cap. "Here you go," she said softly. "I hope your friend loves it." "I know she will," the woman replied, a genuine smile finally returning to her face. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. She took the bag, her fingers brushing against the cool, smooth paper. It felt solid in her hand, a tangible piece of goodness in a world that could sometimes be so harsh. She had come here seeking a moment of peace and a perfect gift. She had found the gift, but the piece had been shattered. Yet, in the end, she had found something else. A quiet moment of strength, a reminder of her own resilience, and a renewed appreciation for the simple, kind acts of a stranger. She was ready to leave. She took one last look around the beautiful, but now tainted, store. The rude woman was still there, complaining about something else, a dark cloud in a corner of the room, but she no longer had any power over her. The woman in the cap straightened her shoulders, held her head a little higher, and walked towards the door, the beautiful gift bag swinging gently at her side. The heavy glass door felt cool under her hand. It was the final barrier between her and the outside world, between the quiet humiliation she had just endured and the freedom of the crowded street. The woman in the baseball cap took a deep breath, the crisp, expensive air of the boutique doing little to soothe the lingering sting in her chest. She had the gift bag in her other hand, a small, weighted symbol of her small victory. She had faced down the ugliness and completed her mission. Now, all she wanted was to disappear into the anonymity of the city. Her fingers tightened around the cool metal handle, ready to push. Just as she applied the slightest pressure, the door swung inward, opening towards her. She instinctively took a step back to avoid being hit. A man walked in, his movements unhurried and relaxed. He was dressed just as simply as she was, in a dark, well-worn jacket, a plain shirt, and jeans that looked like they had been his companions for many years. His hair was a bit messy, and he had a day's worth of stubble on his chin. He looked like he had just rolled out of bed and decided to go for a walk, not like he was about to step into one of the most expensive boutiques in Beverly Hills. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. For a second, there was just a flicker of recognition between two strangers. Then his expression changed. A warm, genuine smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. It was a smile that held no pretense, a smile of seeing a friend you were happy to run into unexpectedly. "Sandy," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "Fancy seeing you here." The sound of her name, spoken with such casual affection, was like a warm blanket on a cold day. It was the first truly genuine, warm thing she had heard since entering the store. A small, real smile touched her lips for the first time since the incident. "Hey," she started to say, her voice a little shaky, but he was already looking past her, his smile fading as his eyes scanned the room. He was perceptive. He could feel the atmosphere in the shop, the way the air was thick with unspoken tension. He saw the sales associates trying to look busy while casting nervous glances towards the front. He saw the other customers pretending to browse while listening intently. His gaze followed their collective line of sight to the source of the disruption. There, near a display of expensive watches, stood the woman in the designer coat. She had her back to them, but her posture was aggressive, her voice a sharp, insistent drone as she lectured a poor sales associate who was trapped behind the counter. "And I don't care if it's the last one in the store, I want to see it. Do you understand who I am? The level of service here is absolutely appalling. I will be speaking to your manager." The man's face hardened. The warm, friendly look in his eyes was replaced by a cold, unwavering focus. He looked back at the woman in the baseball cap, at the tired, hurt look she was trying so hard to hide. He saw the way she clutched the gift bag, not with excitement, but like a shield. He didn't need to ask what had happened. The picture was painfully clear. He had seen enough people like that in his life, people who built themselves up by tearing others down. But this was different. This wasn't some random stranger. This was his friend. A quiet resolve settled over him. He could have just let it go. He could have smiled at her, asked if she was okay, and they could have left together. But he didn't. He took a step forward, moving past her, not towards the door, but deeper into the store. Directly towards the storm, he walked with a calm, steady pace that was somehow more intimidating than any angry outburst could have been. He didn't make a scene. He didn't raise his voice. He simply moved through the space with a quiet purpose that immediately drew everyone's attention. The rude woman, still mid-rant, sensed the shift in the room's energy. She turned, annoyed at having her audience stolen. Her eyes landed on the man walking towards her. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. She just saw another casually dressed person interrupting her very important business. Her face twisted with irritation. "Can I help you?" she snapped, her voice dripping with the same condescension she had used on the woman in the cap. "I'm in the middle of something." He ignored her question. He walked right up to the counter, standing beside her, but not looking at her. Instead, he looked at the terrified sales associate and gave him a small, reassuring nod. Then he turned his full attention to the woman. His gaze was steady, his expression unreadable but intense. It was the kind of look that made you feel completely exposed. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight in the silent store. "I couldn't help but overhear. Were you just being rude to my friend?" He gestured with a slight nod of his head towards the woman in the baseball cap, who was standing by the door. Watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and disbelief, the rude woman's mouth fell open. She was taken aback by the directness of the question. She looked from the man to the woman by the door, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Your friend? I don't know what you're talking about. I was just trying to get some service. This place is a joke?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even change his tone. He just held her gaze, his calmness a stark contrast to her flustered anger. "No," he said simply. "That's not what you were doing. I saw her face when she was leaving. I saw your face when you were talking to her. You were being cruel. And for what? Because of what she was wearing? Because you thought she was less important than you?" The woman started to sputter, her face turning a shade of red. I have no idea who you think you are, but you can't talk to me like this. I spend a lot of money in stores like this." A small, sad smile touched his lips. It was a smile that held no warmth, only a deep sense of pity. "That's the thing," he said, his voice dropping even lower, making it even more intense. "You think money gives you the right to treat people like they're nothing? It doesn't. The woman you were so rude to has more grace, more talent, and more kindness in her little finger than you could ever hope to buy with all your money. She was in here trying to buy a gift for a friend, and you tried to make her feel small for it. That's not just rude. It's pathetic." The word pathetic hung in the air, sharp and final. It was a verbal slap, delivered with such quiet conviction that it was far more devastating than any shout could have been. The woman's face went from red to a ghostly white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She was a fish out of water, gasping for air in an atmosphere she couldn't breathe. The people around them, the shoppers and the staff, were watching in stunned silence. This was not the drama they had been witnessing a few minutes ago. This was something else entirely. This was a reckoning. The man didn't wait for a response. He had said what he needed to say. He turned his back on the woman, completely dismissing her as if she no longer existed. He walked back towards the woman in the baseball cap, his expression softening as he approached her. The entire store watched him go, leaving the rude woman standing alone, utterly and completely humiliated. The power she had wielded so recklessly just moments before had evaporated, leaving her with nothing but the crushing weight of her own ugliness. The silence that followed was a living thing. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the unspoken thoughts of everyone in the room, a collective holding of breath. The woman in the designer coat stood frozen, her face a canvas of shock and humiliation. The confident, arrogant mask she had worn so boldly just moments ago had shattered, revealing the frightened, insecure person underneath. The color had drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale, chalky white. Her mouth, which had been so quick to spit out cruel words, now hung open, a silent, gasping hole. She looked like a statue that had been left out in a storm. Cracked and weathered, her eyes darted around the room, desperate for an ally, but she found none. The sales associates, who had moments ago been targets of her wrath, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and quiet satisfaction. The other shoppers, who had watched her bullying with discomfort, now stared back with open disdain. The power she had wielded so carelessly had vanished, evaporated by a few quiet, steady words spoken by a man in a worn jacket. She was completely, utterly alone. The realization seemed to physically shrink her. Her shoulders slumped, her posture crumpling in on itself. She was no longer a towering figure of entitlement, but a small, pathetic figure in a very expensive coat. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, with a sound that was half a sob and half a choke, she turned. She didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. She fled. Her retreat was not the graceful, dramatic exit of a wronged queen, but the scurrying of a cornered rat. Her expensive heels, which had clicked so confidently on the marble floor when she arrived, now made a frantic, unsteady patter as she rushed towards the door. She didn't look at anyone. She couldn't. She just kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the exit as if it were a life raft in a turbulent sea. The heavy glass door swung open, and she practically stumbled out, disappearing into the bright sunlight, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of her perfume and a profound, echoing silence died as the door clicked shut behind her. The entire store seemed to let out a collective, silent exhale. The tension that had been coiling in the air like a tight spring finally loosened. The atmosphere, once thick with hostility, now felt light and clean. The sales associate who had been trapped by the woman at the watch counter let out a shaky breath and ran a hand through his hair. Clara, from the jewelry counter, caught the eye of the man who had spoken up and gave him a small, grateful nod that was filled with more meaning than words could ever express. The other customers slowly turned back to their browsing, but the energy had completely changed. There was a quiet camaraderie now, a shared experience that had bonded them all. They had witnessed not just a scene, but a small act of justice. The man, however, paid no attention to the lingering stares. He had already dismissed the woman and the entire incident from his mind. His focus was back on his friend. He walked back towards the woman in the baseball cap, his steps slow and relaxed. The intensity in his eyes had melted away, replaced by the familiar, gentle warmth she knew so well. He stopped in front of her, a small, questioning look on his face, as if to ask, "Are you okay?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, relief, and a deep, profound gratitude. The tight knot in her chest had finally loosened. For the first time since the incident began, she felt like she could breathe properly. A small, shaky laugh escaped her lips. It was a sound of pure release, a letting go of all the tension and humiliation she had been holding inside. "You," she started, her voice still a little unsteady, "you really didn't have to do that." He just shrugged, a simple, humble gesture that seemed to say it was no big deal. But his eyes told a different story. They were filled with a fierce, protective loyalty. "Yeah, I did," he said softly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Nobody talks to you like that." It wasn't a grand, heroic statement. It was a simple fact, a fundamental law of his universe. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just being a friend. And in that moment, it meant more to her than any applause or award ever could. She shook her head, a genuine, warm smile finally lighting up her face. "Well, thank you," she said, her voice now strong and clear. "Really?" He smiled back, the crinkles around his eyes deepening. "Anytime," he said simply. He glanced around the now quiet store. "So, did you find what you were looking for?" he asked, changing the subject with an easy grace that immediately put her at ease. He wasn't going to dwell on the drama. He was moving forward, and he was inviting her to move with him. She looked down at the elegant gift bag in her hand, the one she had been clutching like a weapon just a few minutes ago. It now felt light again, a symbol of the good, simple reason she had come here in the first place. "I did," she said, her smile widening. "I found the perfect thing." "Good," he said, nodding towards the door. "Then let's get out of here." Together they walked towards the exit. The other customers and staff watched them go, but there was no gawking, no sense of celebrity watching. It was more like watching two friends leave a party after the awkward guest had finally gone home. As they pushed open the heavy glass door, the little bell chimed again. This time, the sound wasn't an entry into a tense situation, but a release into freedom. Stepping back out onto the busy sidewalk was like stepping into another world. The California sun was warm on their skin, a stark contrast to the cool, artificial air of the boutique. The noise of the city, the hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, The distant wail of a siren was a welcome, normal sound. It was the sound of real life, messy and unpredictable and anonymous. The woman in the baseball cap took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the warm, city air. The feeling of being watched, of being judged, had completely vanished. Out here, they were just two people in jeans and t-shirts, two friends standing on a street corner. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, just watching the world go by. He gestured towards the bag she was holding. "So, who's the lucky person?" he asked, his curiosity genuine. She looked down at the bag, a soft, fond expression on her face. "My best friend," she said. "I missed her birthday. This is a very late, very important apology gift." She told him a little bit about the bracelet, about the imperfect circles and the little blue stones, about how it reminded her of her friend's spirit. As she spoke, the whole ugly incident inside the store felt like it was fading away, shrinking in the bright sunlight. It was becoming just a weird, unpleasant memory, a story they might laugh about one day. He listened intently, nodding along. "She love it," he said when she was finished. "Not because of what it is, but because of how you thought about her. That's what matters." She smiled, a feeling of deep contentment washing over her. He was right. The whole ordeal had been awful, but it hadn't spoiled the most important part. The gift was still a symbol of her love and friendship. And the man standing beside her, her quiet, steadfast friend, had just reminded her of what was truly valuable. It wasn't the expensive things in the boutique or the approval of rude strangers. It was this simple moment, standing in the sun with a friend, the promise of a kind gesture, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that in a world full of people trying to tear each other down, there were still people who would always have your back. And that was a luxury that no store could ever sell.